Nature isn't just out there in some far-off exotic location. It's all around us, including right outside our doors. Hi, my name is Shannon Trimboli, and I am the host of Backyard Ecology. I invite you to join us as we ignite our curiosity and natural wonder, explore our yards and communities, and improve our local pollinator and wildlife habitat. Hi, everyone. Today we're talking to Tom Knezick and Fran Chismar. Tom is the general manager at Pinelands Nursery and owner of Pinelands Direct Native Plants. Fran is the Sultan of Sales at Pinelands Nursery, and they both co-host the Native Plants Healthy Planet podcast. Hi, Tom and Fran. Welcome to Backyard Ecology. Thank you for talking with us today.
Yeah. Hey, how are you doing, Shannon? We're really happy that you're having us on.
Shannon, thank you for having us. And anytime we get introduced, I always feel as if it's like Tom has all these other things. Like even our guest, like everyone has so many things, and it's just like, yeah, Fran's the Sultan of Sales.
Yeah, Fran works here.
Oh, no. I absolutely love your title. That's like the best title I've ever seen for a position.
That was self-proclaimed and blurted out at like a spur of the moment. Tom, you were at a leadership meeting.
Correct? Yeah. So basically one of the things they talked about there is job titles and how people don't necessarily want to have a job title that they're embarrassed to say in public. Like you don't want to be having drinks at the bar with your friends after work and say, oh yeah, I'm a laborer, or I'm such. Not that there's anything wrong with those jobs. They're really important jobs, but you want to, as an employer, as a boss, you want your employees to feel proud of what they do. And sometimes just having a different job title is really important. So one of the things that's really been taken in the nursery trade is the term grower. So a lot of people, instead of saying, oh, I'm a laborer, I'm weeding or doing those kind of things, I'm a grower. I'm and then you work your chain up the head grower. Well, so we were talking about that back at the office, and that's where Fran said, well, I'm going to change my name to Sultan of Sales.
Tom's father said, so Fran, what would you call yourself? I'm like, Sultan of Sales. And we just keep jokingly adding to it. It's like Pontiff of podcast, Magi marketing. Just keep adding it on. Just make the list larger. I'm not doing any more. I'm just I'm just expanding the name out.
Mm-hmm. And it's great because it's fun and it's exciting and people remember it.
Oh yeah. And you get a lot of questions about it, which is fantastic. It starts conversations, and that's from a sales point of view. That's how you sell, is you start conversations, and it's a lot of listening, and which you would be surprised that Fran does really well.
It's an icebreaker, and it kind of gives everyone a precursor to what their interaction is going to be like with us. Is it going to be stuffy? Is it going to be stiff? Or is it going to be a little more loose and fun? And that's what we wanted people to get that impression, that it's, that we're trying to make this enjoyable, the interaction. We want it to be fun. So although some people on first meeting will take it to an extreme, and we have to like bring it back a little bit, we'll work up to that. Let's start a little bit lower.
Yes, exactly. So for our listeners, as you've probably figured out at this point, this conversation is going to be really loose, really informal, just kind of fun, us geeking out, sharing stories, talking about, I'm sure, all kinds of different things related to native plant gardening and native plants. I'm not even sure exactly where this conversation is going to go, just because I know enough about Fran and Tom to know, this is going to go in places that I haven't even thought of, which is going to be good.
Welcome to our world. In about 10 minutes, we'll be talking about my childhood, I'm sure.
I think your listeners will be happy as long as we steer clear of like cheesesteaks and pizza and hot dogs, all the food discussions we end up having, but and getting off on 25 minute tangents. So
we're here to talk about native plants.
Yes. But for our listeners who may not be familiar with your guys' podcast, so may not know much, if anything, about you all, let's go ahead and start with telling everyone just a little bit about who you are, what you do, how you got started in all of this. So yes, Fran, tell us about your childhood.
It actually kind of stems back to my childhood. I like to say that the nursery industry chose me. I did not choose it. So without making a long story longer, when I graduated high school, I chose not to go to college. And at that point, my father presented me with two unique opportunities. He said, you can either join the working class or you can join the homeless. So at that point, I was scrambling for a job, and I had a friend that was working at Moon Nurseries, which at the time was in Yardley, PA, and got me a job there. And that was 32 years ago. And I'm still doing it today. And I, if you were to ask me back then, if I saw myself staying in the nursery industry, I didn't. At the time, I just needed a job, and I didn't know I would fall in love with it. And I didn't know that it would change over time with how I felt about it and my love for it. I was fortunate enough to work for many different types of nurseries over those 32 years. I worked for Star Roses, which at the time was one of the top 3 rose growers in the country. I worked for large wholesale nurseries. I was the sales manager at Princeton Nurseries, which was at one time the largest nursery in the world, not while I was there. And then here, and when I came to Pinelands Nursery 14 years ago, I didn't really know the native plant industry or much about ecology. At that point, I knew plants, but I had worked for, between Princeton and the Connor Pyle Company, probably introduced more plants at that time than any other nurseries. So it was very humbling for me. And I think I tried to talk myself out of the job when they offered it to me. I was like, I don't think I can do it. That really, those last 14 years, I think, changed more in who I am as a person than the previous 18 years. It's, this has become more of a lifestyle for me. And I'm not a tremendous plant nerd or geek. But it changes how I look at everything. And it's become part of me. Like, this is now not a career or a job. This is part of my identity. So I can't imagine not having that. And that's kind of how I ended up here.
Nice.
Yeah. And my story also kind of goes back to my childhood. And because I was born into this, my parents started a native plant nursery. Actually, I should rephrase that. They started a nursery that morphed into a native plant nursery really in its infancy. And I'm not going to get into that whole story because it's kind of long and I've heard it way too much. But so I was born and they had this fledgling nursery. I was their first child, but this was really their first born was the nursery, Pinelands Nursery. And they were growing native plants primarily for ecological restoration work in the mid-Atlantic, primarily in New Jersey, but then you go into New York City, down into the Chesapeake Bay region, and still our footprint is on the East Coast. But I grew up with it, and this was my playground. I'm coming out and I'm having fun digging in the sand pile where we used to mix soil. And I remember taking like my little green plastic army men in there, and they were still finding them when they were potting plants the next day. They're finding all my toys in the mixer in the pots that are coming out. So so I like really grew up with this nursery and just playing and enjoying the outdoors. My parents both really enjoyed the outdoors, camping a lot. We did so much fishing. All of us were avid hunters as well. So we were spending so much time in the outdoors, but I never put it together. The whole native plant thing. And in fact, like when I was in high school, I remember driving down the road and my dad would always point out trees and be like, oh, what's that tree? What's that tree? We're going by at like 70 miles. Actually, my dad drives slow. We were driving like 55 miles an hour.
You were driving 45.
Yeah, 55 in a 65 mile per hour zone. But and I can't pick these things out. And I'm like, Dad, I'm a teenager. Let me just read my book or play. I don't have video games, but like, let me just play on my phone in the back seat. I don't want to pay attention to any of this stuff. And it was actually later, once I got out of college, that I started to look back and say, wow, I really missed out on not paying attention to that, because I would have known a lot of this stuff already. But even I was a agricultural business major when I went to college, but I had a lot of friends that were going into green industry type majors. A lot of them actually turf grass or landscaping majors, and they were taking all these plant classes, like woody plant classes, and I was able to identify stuff better than they were in the class. I was actually helping them out on their homework, and so that some of that stuff did stick with me. But then it was really when I got out and started working for the nursery that I started to put stuff together and see how important some of this stuff was. And one of the things my dad and both my parents did really well is they said, hey, Doug Tallamy's speaking at this conference, you're going to go. Or so-and-so's Larry Weiner is speaking at this conference, you're going to go here. Or Claudia West is speaking at this conference, you're going to go here. And they would send me to all these conferences, which was great because I got to listen to these top-notch naturalists, gardeners, landscape architects on how this stuff was supposed to work. And then make all these connections at the same time. So I at that point, I worked in a native plant nursery, but I didn't get native plants yet. And that's what really opened it up. And now doing the podcast and having these conversations on a weekly basis with people who are way, way smarter than me on this topic, it's really opened my eyes. And it's like, it's better than going to a college class because you're just getting force fed all this information that's so high tech. It's awesome.
It's our own little private college course, basically.
Oh, yeah.
You know, and I want to say it's very similar for me because when I came here, this being part of the native plant industry, you're part of the industry, the plant industry, but you're on the fringe. You're a part of it and you're not a part of it. And you're not doing your typical industry trade shows. We do a lot of conferences that are wetland conferences or stormwater conferences. And you're going and you're getting all these great talks and all this fantastic education. Instead of just standing in a booth, you're meeting the people you look up to and you're getting to hear them talk. And I felt like a sponge, you know, and I knew as soon as I came here, I noticed the difference between ornamental hort and an environmental hort, because it's almost the difference between an artist and a biologist. It's not, one is for aesthetics and there's a deeper purpose. And I love that deeper purpose and wanted to learn more. And then even like Tom mentioned, once we started the podcast a year and a half ago, man, just the amount that I've learned and how much that has changed, even my opinions on certain things have really, you get a greater understanding because you're dealing with it more often. Mm-hmm. So, you know, I feel really fortunate we get to do this as part of our job because I feel like I'm getting a free education by doing it. But
I completely agree. I've learned so much and gotten to talk to so many different amazing people since I started the podcast. And yeah, I mean, I'm constantly learning, but I think that's one of the things that's just a given or a constant between people in this field or with these interests is that we love learning. And we love learning about nature and plants and just totally being nature nerds and nature geeks and digging in and learning new things and following new rabbit holes.
Yeah, it's not always about, you know, you kind of shed a little bit about money. Like obviously it's a business and you need to make money, but it kind of goes beyond that and deeper than that. Like you always have your connection with other plant people, but this connection seems to be a little bit deeper. And I don't know how to explain it unless you've experienced both.
Yes, exactly. And I mean, I love the fact that with nature and with native plants, there's so many different ways that we can get into them. I mean, both of you guys kind of came from, well, Fran especially came from plants in the plant world.
Yeah.
Tom, you kind of came from, it sounds like both, obviously the plant world, but then through fishing, through hunting, through running around in the woods, you also came from the nature outdoorsy side. And that's a lot of where I came from too, going then into wildlife biology and ecology and studying that. And that led to my love of pollinators, then my love of native plants and growing native, and it just kind of all builds upon each other, but it's this big tangled web and there's so many different ways to enter it.
You know, and that's, I think for me, even, I wouldn't even say I came from it from a plant standpoint. To me, it was more of a business standpoint. It was more, all of my training that I got once I started to move up through these nurseries were all business training and management training. So plants just happened to be the product that we were dealing with at the time. So I would have never, 20 years ago, if you would have told me, like, explain my life to me now, I'd be like, get out of here. No way, no way. And it really changes your approach and how you look at it thing. And that kind of what has guided Tom and I in our approach to native plants, in that there's space for everyone. Like not everyone can just jump in and say, I'm going to be all native plants right now. You kind of have to let everyone find their footing and ease into it to a point that they're comfortable. And not everyone's going to achieve the same level. It's just, but you have to make room for everyone to gain that appreciation at their own pace.
Yeah. And they have to appreciate it for their own reasons.
Yeah.
That was become a big part of our message is we are, if you read Nature's Best Hope by Doug Talman, he talks about Homegrown National Park, and he really puts into pretty tight parameters that bad things are going to happen on the planet unless we make these changes. So we need to make these changes quick. And if we were just to rely on all the native plant fans and enthusiasts right now, we're barely a drop in the bucket. We need to get so many more people on board. And another thing we rag a lot on is social media and how great of a tool it is, but how often we see people getting chased out. They want to dip their toes in native plants and they're getting chased away by people who are purists. People need to join this movement and do it for their own reasons. If they like to fish, well, there's tons of plants that you need to plant if you want to have good fish habitat, even at home, that'll help clean the water that's going into. A lot of people will notice sometimes on the storm drains around here, at least, we start getting it'll say what watershed that water is going into, and I'll have a picture of a fish, and which is a great reminder about how many people are actually looking at the storm drain and thinking about it. But yeah, if you plant the right plants at home, it's going to clean that water, at least slow it down so it's not picking up, or even if you just stop using as much fertilizer on your yard and pesticides on your yard, well, now it's slowing that water down and it's not picking up the pollutants that are going to make it into that storm drain. It's little tiny changes each person makes, and it affects their personal goals. They're doing it for their own reasons, but it's really not big changes that everyone has to make to really achieve everyone has to do it to achieve that big outcome.
Yeah, but we've kind of adopted, don't hold everyone else to your standards, because every plant has a story. Shannon, there has got to be a plant that you love that's not a native plant that holds a dear, memory to you from your childhood, maybe.
Oh yeah, and I completely get everything you guys are saying and agree with it, because yes, native plants are important, but I'm with you. We've got to be able to bring everybody in, let everybody come in from where they're at. And I say all the time, I am not a purist. I have a heavy bias towards native plants, but I am not a purist. When we bought our property, we inherited a lot of daffodils from the previous owners, or several previous owners. Yeah. They make me smile in February and March. I'm not getting rid of my daffodils. I'm sorry. There's a balance here.
There is, and we've likened it to someone that is now a vegan. At some point, I'm sure they were a meat eater, and then maybe they dipped their toes in being a vegetarian, and then kind of worked their way. And even they may still have their guilty pleasures that, I love this, and I allow myself this guilty pleasure, every so often. So there's space for all of it, and at the end, everyone's working to the same goal. So why there should be tolerance of all of that, to know that as long as everyone's making some small steps towards that goal, then how could it be bad?
Right. And not everybody knows what all of the native plants are. I mean, sometimes you just don't know that this is an exotic, or worse yet, that this is an invasive species. I mean, the invasive species lists are changing all the time. We get more of them, unfortunately. So you're always having to learn new ones there as well. But giving people space to learn and support them as they're learning.
And that's part of our problem with social media, is that, and we understand the frustration, because there can only be so many posts about the same plant in a week.
Yes.
that one person can take. But these are all people that are interested, that don't know, and they're looking for guidance, and they're trying to do the right thing. So you have to be accepting to that. And I understand it can be frustrating, but I kind of liken it to dealing with family. Yeah, they frustrate you sometimes, but they're still family. You still love them. So it's just, you have to find a way to work through it.
Yeah. And for me, it's, you don't want to make people spiteful. Especially when you talk about your neighbors, you don't want to, you don't want to chastise them. One of the things that drives me nuts is when people are talking about their neighbors. Oh, my neighbor's such an idiot. They're doing this, and they have Rosa Sharon, and they have all this stuff. And if you confront your neighbor with that, or they see that social media post, they're not going to be happy, and they're going to do things to spite you. Now they're doing it out of anger because you were angry at them. Mm-hmm. Where if you kind of help them come along and give suggestions, or nice suggestions, I should say, and now you're being a friendly neighbor. Yeah, they're not. A lot of times the people don't know. Well, my in-laws didn't know Rosa Sharon was invasive when they asked me where they could get some. so yeah, you got to bring those people along and say, oh yeah, just so you know that this is an issue for these reasons, and maybe you want to look at a different plant instead and give suggestions that way, because they didn't know that it was invasive. They didn't know it was a problem. They thought it was a beautiful plant. They got 14 others in their yard, and 3 of them died, and they wanted to replace them. So that was what they were going to replace them with. They had no clue that it had any ecological it caused any ecological damage. And the majority of the population's like that. Most people don't know how much damage they're doing just through their, even outside of gardening, through their day-to-day activities. Most people know how much there was a report on how much gas is spilled through mowing lawns, and it was like greater than the BP oil spill in the Gulf each year is spilled in gasoline just filling up weed whackers, mowers, lawn equipment.
Yeah.
And people don't know that. And I didn't know that until I read it.
I didn't know it either.
I hadn't seen that.
I can't remember who put out that statistic, but
I think my biggest issue isn't even with social media. I think the nursery industry, we had talked a few weeks back about an article that they were saying there's still 1,200 invasive species available through garden centers throughout the U.S. That's, to me, a much larger issue, because we've talked to people in the nursery industry that are in denial that certain things are invasive. Like, prove to me that barberry's invasive. And we're like, come on a walk with me. Let's go for a walk, because they're chasing the dollar. So they're giving misinformation to their customers. So then it becomes, well, who's right? This person's telling me this isn't invasive, and I can go to my local box store and find it. So why is it a problem if I can buy it, and you're telling me these things are bad? So it becomes almost like a duel, like who's giving misinformation and who's giving correct information. And that's a hard thing to combat.
And we could sit here and complain about the nursery industry doing those kind of things, or we can try and make a change, which is why I joined the New Jersey Nursery and Landscape Association and got on their board, so I could have a voice in those when they're talking about public policy. And there's a bill on, well, this is actually true, there's a bill on banning neonics in the state of New Jersey, and overall the green industry is green industry meaning like golf courses and landscapers, those kind of things, are against it because it's an everyday tool for them. That's a big part of what they use on a day-to-day basis, and they make a lot of money off those services using those tools. And but it was a topic of discussion. Does the New Jersey Nursery and Landscape Association support this? And there's nurseries that definitely want to support it because, well, if you're growing plants in nursery, it makes things a heck of a lot easier. And there's nurseries that don't want to support it because they look at it and say, yeah, it makes things a lot easier, but it's a bad thing for a lot of insects. And in our case, we're growing plants that we want to help insects and all kinds of wildlife. So we don't want to put this out in the land, or not in the landscape, but in ecological areas in these restoration projects. So just through those conversations, the NJNLA took a stance of, we're not going to say anything about, we're not going to support or be opposed to this bill. We're just not going to say anything because we have people who want to support it and don't. Where 10 years ago, they would have definitely said, hey, we don't want to support, we're opposed to this bill, we want neonics. But things change, and if I wasn't there, maybe that wouldn't have been the case. You need that voice in the room. So that's another thing we talk about all the time, is you got to bring all these other parties in and share your experiences and share your voices. Because
I think the difference maker is a more educated consumer, where if they know and say, if you're using neonics, we don't want to buy your product. If enough people do that, then the nurseries have no other alternative than to stop using it. They're doing what makes them the most amount of money.
Yeah.
And I can't fault anyone for that. I'm not here to put anyone down for supporting their family and their employees. But the consumers can definitely drive this. If they're more educated, more passionate about what they're doing, it can make, to me, a bigger change than anything else.
Yeah. And vocal about it in the right ways. It's you can be against the use of neonics, but if you aren't going to your garden centers and saying, oh, I'm not going to buy anything unless you're neonic free, they aren't getting that feedback. They don't know that they aren't getting your dollars unless you tell them they aren't getting your dollars.
Yeah.
So you need to make that very clear. And there's some people, when you go to a garden center or nursery and they say, oh yeah, are you, just plain out ask, are you neonic free? And if they say, well, the best answers are when they don't know.
What's a neonic?
But if they aren't, then explain why you don't want to buy that plant, and eventually it'll make its way to their boss. And maybe the boss will say, well, we can't do it otherwise, but or any other way. But if they hear it enough, they're going to start looking into it and make a difference. And that's what happened with Home Depot and Lowe's, is they kind of took a stance on that. And I don't want to get too far off topic, starting talking about neonics, because I don't know if the alternatives to neonics, just because someone's neonic free doesn't mean they're pesticide free.
No,
sometimes the alternatives are much worse than the neonic was.
I just think it's funny because you can make that stance, but are they still selling those products in their store? Because you can walk into either of those, and I have, and seen burning bush and barberry and all these things. So you have to, they can make a stand, but you have to make a stand too. Like, and I know as a consumer, your choices are limited, especially if you want native plants. I understand that. But if you walk into a place that has all these invasives, you can choose not to buy from them and tell them why you're not going to buy from them. Yeah. And maybe they won't. They're going to make a change. They're not going to go out of business. Right. It's just how many of us are willing to do that.
And I think the other important thing with it too is that if you're talking to people like this or about these issues, do it the way you'd want somebody to talk to you about it. Don't go and be just all up in their face about it, because they're going to turn off. You would. And so you
that's
have
a good
to
way
do
to
it
get posted on social media, is the next Karen on social media, is if you do it with anger. But you got to talk to people how you want to be talked to. You don't want people coming. Well, again, you don't want someone coming up to your yard and saying, oh, look at all these weeds growing here, and being angry about it. They may be angry about it, but then you're going to do it out of spite and say, oh, I'm going to make my garden look even crazier because they don't like it and I want to make them angry.
So Shannon, I have a question for you. So knowing what you know and being an ecologist, which I know Tom, someone quote, like, being an ecologist is the loneliest place to be because you see what's
you see so many issues. I can't remember the exact quote.
But and also being a lover of native plants and being a consumer, what's your biggest frustration looking for plants to plant that are the choices that you want to make? Or do you find that a hard thing to find, say, I'm not even saying local provenance plants, just native plants? Is that a frustration for you?
I think, well, I do have a small, very, very small backyard native plant nursery. So I kind of get a little bit of it from both sides. But for me, one of my frustrations is, one, being able to find the plants that I want. I mean, it seems like we've all got the same things, but there's a lot of things that I would also like to have that I can't find. And even when I get the seeds for them, you try and germinate those things. So finding and getting the plants that I want. And that's what I hear from a lot of my customers too, because I'm so small. I do have pretty good relationships with people, and I start to know what they want and stuff like that. And we have those discussions, but being able to find exactly what I want, especially if I want to try and keep it at least a semi-local genotype. I mean, I've got roundstone native seeds not far away, so that helps out a whole lot.
And they're great people.
Because they're an hour and a half. They do a lot of local genotypes, at least in the Southeast, if not in Kentucky. So I've got a lot of help there with that, but still there's some that, oh my gosh. And that's one of the questions I want to ask you guys too, are what are some of the ones that you would like to grow, either in the nursery or for your own use, that are challenging for you? Because I've got a few that, forget it. I cannot get them to grow.
Yeah,
So
go ahead.
I'll say this one is not that it's challenging. It's this is more of a personal moral dilemma that I've talked about a couple times that I'm keep waffling back and forth on, and that's American beautyberry is a awesome plant, and I'm so jealous of people like you where it grows naturally, but it's not native in New Jersey, and I love the plant. It's one of my favorite like native shrubs, and has a ton of wildlife value as well, not just to birds, but like all kinds of wildlife. Deer love it, but I'd love to grow it. Actually, my wife, this is where I started with beautyberry. My wife saw a non-native beautyberry outside of like a library and said how awesome it looked. I'm like, oh, well, there is a native one. And I didn't really know much about it at the time, but I was like, oh, maybe I'll get it. But then I started looking at it. I'm like, well, it's not native to New Jersey. It's native, I think, to like Maryland and to the Southeast. But it's not native to New Jersey. And I keep going back and forth. Is it okay? It grows here, but is it okay for me to plant it here or not? I was pretty strict with myself at first with my garden being as native as I could possibly do it. And I didn't feel right planting it. And I think right now I would probably lean towards planting it, but that's more of like a moral dilemma where I'm like, oh, it's not, I will never get the correct ecotype seed because it's not native to this ecotype. So it's it's one of those things. But Fran, you had a couple that you were talking about, right?
Yeah, actually, two of my favorite native plants aren't native to the Northeast. I love oak leaf hydrangea and I love Amsonia hubrichtii, and they're just not native here, but they thrive here. They do well here, and that's a dilemma. Like for me, I still want them. I still love them. It doesn't change how I feel about them, even though they're not native here. But I know for us as a nursery, two of the items, what you tend to find is some of the items that aren't available readily in the trade is because one, they're rare, and you're not finding the seed community. You try to do the right thing. You're trying to get local genotype, local provenance. 95% of what we grow is from seed that we collect ourselves. So if something's rare, you're not going to get a big enough seed source to do it. And a lot of the times those rare plants are rare for a reason. They're not meant to be everywhere. They have unique conditions, or they have symbiotic relationships with other rare plants, and that makes it tough. But the two things, or most of the time when you can't find something, it's because it's terribly hard to grow from seed, and no one's really figured it out. And I know when I came here, also the propagator from Princeton Nurseries came here, and there were 4 items that we were selling that we did not grow from seed. And Tom's father, Don, challenged him with figuring out how to do them. And it took him 10 years, but he figured out how to do them. We're growing 3 of them now, but only one of them's from seed, one's from root cuttings. It's just difficult on what you want, but we always have people that ask for beech heather and huckleberry, and we just haven't figured out how to do it. And no one has, you can't find them anywhere. And that's, I think for restoration purposes, that's a plant people want to incorporate. And we just, you just haven't figured it out. If anyone could figure that out, it would be a wonderful thing. Not just us. If anyone could figure out how to do those things consistently, that would be an awesome.
And what Fran brings up is really important, because we're a business at the same time. We love what we do, and we can feel really good about what we do, because it's going to such great purposes. But we still got to make money doing it, or we won't be doing it for very long.
Yeah.
And
exactly.
one of the ones that came to mind, or 2 or 3.
Were you thinking Trillium?
I'm thinking Trillium, but I'm going to say was the lupines. We get requests for a lot, but they're just really rare in our area. Mountain laurel, which isn't very rare, but it's one I don't know why more people aren't growing it, other than it must be hard to do. I know we've tried a little bit, but
when you see it available in the trade, it's harvested directly out of the woods. If you're looking at street species, which you don't necessarily want to do, and then everything else are cultivars, which are being done from tissue culture on the West Coast. So you're not really providing the same pollinator benefit. So it's difficult, but Glenn did figure out how to grow it, but we could never figure out a way to be profitable growing it, because it would take so long to produce that plant.
Yeah, but I remember going back to the Trillium. I remember being at a conference. It was through the Native Plant Network. which is a website. I don't remember the URL, but it was if you Google Native Plant Network, it should come up. But they had a conference in Washington, D.C. a couple of years ago that I went to. And there was someone giving a presentation, and during the course of their presentation, they came on Trilliums and like, I don't know why these aren't available in the nursery trade. Such a great plant, such a unique plant. And then they went on the propagation process, and they're like, oh yeah, it takes like 7 years to get a viable plant from seed. And I'm like, well, you kind of answered your question, because we could take a Asclepias incarnata, which is germinate once you stratify it, will germinate really well, and we could grow at least 2 crops of that a year. And then you multiply that by 7 years, so you have 14 flats to take up, and we're making $50 some a flat. So you multiply that out, we'd have to charge that total for 1 flat of Trillium if we wanted to sell a flat of Trillium. And I don't think anyone's willing to pay that much for that plant.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's not cost effective to do it, because the life cycle is just so long to get it up to a saleable size.
But that being said, if native plant lovers wanted to have that seed and grow it themselves and trade with other, if everyone, how did commerce start in the first place? You had something that someone else wanted, they had something you wanted, you traded, and
you were good at it.
Yeah.
So it's not everyone's going to be good at growing Trilliums, but there are going to be people who are really good at growing Baptisia, something else. And even that's common in the nursery trade. We have specialties, and there's other stuff we do, but there's other nurseries that do it way better than we do it. So, and especially that's really evident in the seed trade, with the native seed trade, is there's people who specialize in certain plants. And what I found, we've only started selling seed about 5 years now, but what I found is a lot of these seed producers are like just old farmers that started doing this and really enjoy it. And there's things that we specialize in, and I'll talk to people even out in like South Dakota that there's a seed house out in South Dakota, and they're saying, oh yeah, we have this. I met them for the first time. It's like, oh yeah, we have this species of plant, and it's a New Jersey ecotype. Did that come from you? But it traded hands like 3 or 4 times before it got to him. It was like a wacky game of telephone. But there's just specialties, and some people you're trading back and forth because we're really good at growing certain stuff, and Ernst is really good at growing certain stuff, and Roundstone's really good at growing certain stuff, and then you have all these West Coast producers, they're good at their own stuff, and instead of us trying to do everything and doing some of it poorly, it's a lot easier for us to specialize in a couple things and then have other people supplement, and you just kind of trade around. But I forget where I started with when I got off.
No, that's okay. It's to expand on that, one of the things that's nice about being in the native plant industry is that we're friendly with most of our competitors. We're friends. We've all started around the same time. We've had customers comment at trade shows where they'll come up, and like 2 of our biggest competitors were all standing in the middle of the trade show floor laughing because we'll go out and have a drink together. We'll have dinner together. We're all friends. Right. So we all have our own specialties. We overlap a little bit, but we all do things differently. And we've opened our doors to each other where they're like, I know that you do this better than anyone else. If you show us how you do this, we'll show you how we do this item. And even though we know how the other person does it, we can't replicate it. We just can't. And it's nice to see that we can have that kind of relationship where we can show each other what we're doing and give each other hints, because in the end, we all have the same customer base. We're all selling to the same people. We just want to do the right thing and help those customers out. So
yeah, and I found the same thing with some of the other small native plant nurseries here in Kentucky. I mean, we know each other, we talk, we share information. I'll be like, oh, I don't have that, but so-and-so down the road, I think has it. Here, let me check and find out, and kind of put them together and stuff. I mean, I've even been at events and stuff where I wasn't selling native plants, but one of these others were, and I've helped them sell their plants because it's like, okay, somebody will come up and they'll be a beekeeper, and they'll be looking for specific things, and I might be there talking to the nursery owner, just chatting, and they kind of look at me, and I'm like, okay, and I'm off to the races, and I'm selling their plants to the beekeeper or to somebody that's interested in this or that particular pollinator or wildlife species that they're interested in, that I may know a little bit more about and can do those more ecological connections with. And I mean, same thing, we send back and forth. It's awesome.
And that's what, the nice thing about that is even though we talk very kindly about most of our competitors, there are companies or nurseries out there doing it for different reasons than what we're doing. And so if you're helping a customer out by steering them towards someone that you trust and you would buy from, that's a wonderful thing because they're being taken care of. And
and not to cut you off, Fran, but I know you'll go on forever if I don't. But it's what your scenario there is, because you're doing it for the right reasons. You want that person to take home the best plant for them because it's helping the planet so much. And where Fran's kind of getting at is there's native plants becoming trendy. Yeah. And there's people who are willing to slap a native plant label on something that, it's native to the continent, but it's not native to our area. Yes. And just because they can mark it up a little bit, or it just catches someone's eye and say, oh, I've heard about native plants, I didn't realize this was a native plant. And there's some people who are just after the dollars that go along with native plants. The same way there's some organizations that are just after the dollars that come along with being organic. And then there's people who are actually organic. Yeah. So, so that's kind of what Fran is leading into. Back to you.
No, it's, like a perfect example is a lot of times at conferences, one of my best friends in the industry is Jim McKenzie at Octorara Native Plant Nurseries in Pennsylvania. They'll put us next to each other in exhibit halls, and we kind of laugh. And they're like, well, you're friends. And we're like, yeah, but we're also competitors. But we walk customers over to each other and say, if this is what you're looking for, this is really who you need to be talking to, not me. Yeah. And we kind of feel confident that we're handing the customer over to someone that's going to take care of them. And that's because if someone has a bad experience, then maybe they don't use native plants next time. Yeah. We want to make sure that you have a good experience and you stay with it. We want to
make sure you're getting something that was grown the right way. And like, it would be a heck of a lot easier if we were buying plants in from Florida or Tennessee up to New Jersey or Oregon and bringing them to New Jersey. Because you can still get a red maple that's it's native here. It's native in a lot of those, or it's not native in Oregon, but they grow them great in Oregon because it's got great conditions for it. But and it's a lot cheaper to do it that way and a lot easier because we aren't going out and getting the seed and collecting ourselves and stratifying ourselves and doing that whole process. But we want to do it the right way. We want to make sure that our customers are getting plants that are good for their region. And there's sometimes we have people calling us from other parts of the country and we'll turn them away, and well, I don't want to say turn them away because we don't necessarily do that, but we'll almost dissuade them from getting it and say, you might want to find it someplace closer for those reasons. And then there's times where they'll say, well, I can't find it anywhere else, so I'm just going to get it from you. Yeah. And, but you think about it when that happens, when you have plants that are going to Louisiana or Oklahoma or Wisconsin or other places. Sometimes it's just easier to do it through us because they found us first, we'll try and steer them to the right places a lot of times just because
you want to do the right thing.
Yeah, it's nice to get the check or the credit card payment, but you want to make sure they're doing it the right way.
Right. And you want, like you said, you want them to be successful. And
exactly. Yeah.
I mean, you and I, you guys are in New Jersey. I'm in Kentucky. We have a lot of the same native plants. There's a lot that are different, but we also have a lot of the same native plants. You're more northern than I am. You're more coastal than I am. Your soils are sandier than mine. I mean, we can just keep going on and on about the differences. So even though they're the same native plant, my plants are not going to be good, the best options. We'll put that way, the best options for your customers. Your plants are not going to be the best options for my local customers. I mean, it's just not going to work well. You're not setting them up for success.
Yeah. And it still may work great, but it's not the best option. And that's, we had an awesome discussion about cultivars the other day, not to get too off topic again. But that was, I've always kind of been, I don't want to say anti-cultivar, but I've been wary of cultivars because there are so many that are so far deviated from the original plant that they were taken from.
Yes.
But then there's others that are just a selection from a wild site, and they may be perfect for your area because they were selected from a mountaintop in Georgia, and you live on a mountaintop in Georgia. Well, that cultivar is a local eco-type plant for you.
Or that variety, variety may be a perfect choice. But Shannon, what you said actually brings up a really good point with, certain items not being the best, or what we have aren't your best options in Kentucky. But a lot of the customers don't realize that, or they don't know that. As far as, I don't want to say customers, for us, it would be listeners, podcast listeners.
Yeah.
And the biggest question we get asked, I think more than anything, is the blurred line between what is native.
Yeah.
Yes.
Oh yeah.
And that's not an easy statement or question to answer, because there's so many contingencies to that. I don't know how you, if that's something that you find when dealing, say, with the nursery, is that a common question?
I get that a lot with the nursery, with the podcast, with my blog, with the educational stuff I do. Yeah, that is something that I get asked a lot and that I bring up a lot, even when I'm not asked, because a lot of times people don't even know to ask. I mean, you don't know what you don't know.
Yeah.
So a lot of times people don't even know to ask those questions. So I will bring those questions up. And unfortunately, the answer at some point comes down to the ecological answer that we all hate and we all use all the time, is that it depends. So I'll use, a lot of times if I'm just talking native plants, in general, I'm talking about native to whatever state I'm in, because that's easy.
Yeah.
Plants don't recognize these geopolitical boundaries. They're not going to get state lines. Everything's blurred. There's plants in the Appalachian Mountains of Eastern Kentucky that do not grow in far Western Kentucky on the Mississippi floodplain, and vice versa.
Yeah. And, and even historical knowledge we've debated, and Tom has brought this up before. We have a book, it's probably 70 years old at this point, and it breaks it down by native plants in New Jersey by county. But it will list pawpaw as native in this particular county that the nursery's in, all up and down the Delaware River. Well, it really didn't grow there. It was Native Americans kind of would
Native Americans would basically take the seeds and they use the Delaware River as a navigation route, and they would plant them along the way so that they had food sources if they found themselves in that spot. And it's the same thing on the Ohio River and the Mississippi River and all these little rivers across the East Coast. But they were, my whole thing when it comes to a time frame, and I revert to the USDA definition a lot on native plants, at least from the time perspective, that it was from before colonization. But even you can't say Columbus, because you had the Vikings came over before that, and then there's so much. And I just read listened to a book. I listen to a lot of audiobooks, but I just listened to the book 1491, and it talks about what it was like here when Columbus first arrived, and how some of these Native American settlements were just thriving.
Oh, they were huge.
And they were enormous. But then, and there was even in South America where the conquistadors came back and they were beaten by, or they came to South America, they were beaten by the native populations. And then when they came back, there was no one there it was because of disease. Yeah. And I know, Southeastern Grasslands Initiative talks about the plains, and a lot of that was through Native American influence, where they were doing a lot of burning, they were doing a lot of hacking back of some of these species because they wanted to be grasslands, because there was advantages to having grasslands. But then when you had colonists first arrive, well, the Native Americans had all died of disease, or 95% of that population had died of disease, but they were left with the remnants of what their civilization had, which was a lot of open grasslands with few trees scattered between, and then you had some small thickets and those kind of things. So yeah, we have a continent that was managed for millennium, and so colonization is kind of hard to look at too, but because it was managed for so long. But you had, I go back to colonization as that time frame, is you had Native Americans were moving plants, but they weren't moving very fast. They were still moving quickly, but not as quickly as people coming across from thousands of miles away from a separate continent with completely different flora and fauna, and introducing it within a matter of months. And
having no natural predators for that flora and fauna to be able to take off. But you had changes that were happening, but they were at a incredibly slow pace compared to how rapid it happened once you had European colonization. But now that's your history. But now you flash forward to now you have climate change. You have human interaction and climate change. So what's the answer moving forward? And those are answers are questions I don't have answers to. I don't know what that answer is, and we get asked that, and I don't know.
And
I
no
don't think
one has
anybody
the
does.
answer. Yeah, it's I guess the U.S. Forest Service is working on something now where if you were to, at least 3-4 years ago, they started on it, where if you were to wanted to plant a tree in one location based on projected climate change, where you would have to collect that seed from for it to grow to like 100 years old. And as you like expanded the metrics from like 5 years to 10 years to 25 years, how long you wanted that tree to live to 100, it would show you just how small those regions were getting. And there was some stuff where, well, those regions didn't exist anymore, that because of climate change. You had little ecoregions, these small little specific plots that were in the Appalachians where the climate was different just because of the topography. And that was where you were able to select your seed from. Well, eventually that disappeared because of climate change. So yeah, it's interesting conundrum.
Yeah. Even that, it's funny because from there, I think the second biggest question is what is invasive? And and then you get into the whole conversation. Well, if it's a native plant, it can't be invasive. It has to be aggressive. But if it historically isn't native to that area, why can't it? Just because it's native to North America, that doesn't mean it can't be invasive, because we've seen our East Coast bay grass be invasive on the West Coast. So
black locust is always referred to. And now black locust invasive, or what I would consider invasive in our area. It's not traditionally native to our area of the country in the Northeast, but at the same time, it colonizes quickly, and it has a lot of different wildlife and ecosystem services that it performs too. It's great for pollinators. So yeah, it's very aggressive here, and it can take over hedgerows and stuff like that, but it also has some benefits as well. And you can't get a lot of other things to grow there because of how divided the ecosystem is now too. Yeah.
Shannon, we're looking to you for the answers.
Oh, I don't have the answers. I'm gonna throw more questions on here and complicate it even worse, because I've always kind of gone with the native to your area has those complex relationships. So in this case, black locust, even though it's native where I'm at in Kentucky and native to much of the East, it wouldn't necessarily be native, and therefore could be invasive up where you guys are at. But then my husband and I were having this conversation literally just a couple of days ago, because he's also a wildlife biologist. And he brought up the point of Eastern red cedar in Oklahoma and the prairies there. Eastern red cedar is a native plant in Oklahoma, but it's overtaking the prairies because we don't have the fire that we used to have on the landscape. We don't have the large scale grazing animals like we do. Those things that would maintain those grasslands as grasslands. So what's Eastern red cedar in Oklahoma? So now it gets all complicated when you start looking at, okay, if we're not just looking at a state or a region, are we looking at specific ecological areas? And if we start to go by that, then how can we say that in your garden a native plant can't be invasive, because they don't grow natively in a garden setting? And oh my gosh, my mind's just blown. I don't even know where to go.
And you can keep taking this so many steps removed too. Like for us, native in New Jersey is maple leaf viburnum. You can't find one because of the deer pressure has basically taken out most of the forest understory. So does that mean it's not native here anymore because you can't find it anymore? Because now there's no predators for the deer, and the deer population have gotten out of control. And with fragmentation and overpopulation, we've created a whole nother issue that we're kind of dealing with by allowing hunting, but not dealing with at the same time. So it poses all these questions because we tend to keep overcomplicating it with what we do as humans. And I don't know what any of those answers are. I don't know. You're right. Like it's, that the whole juniper thing really blows my mind, because all the things that would keep it in check no longer exist. So how do you now keep that in check?
And going back to not knowing about, I didn't know that was an issue. We sell Eastern red cedar here, and I didn't know it was an issue in other parts of the country until I started listening to another podcast that was all about habitat management, and they're complaining about Eastern red cedar so much. I'm like, what? Hi, guys, why do these guys hate cedars so much? They love native plants, but they hate cedars. And then I started to look more into it, and through the podcast, they told me more about it. But I was like, I didn't even realize that was an issue.
Well,
Something
deer.
I didn't either. I think my husband and you listen to the same podcast, actually.
But deer for us actually keep Eastern red cedar in check, because it's not as common as I think it should be for us. And I think that's something that's creating a whole nother issue now, because I'm convinced what's the issue going on with deer now here with the deer kill?
Oh, we have a EHD, which I don't remember what that stands for, but it's a disease that deer die really rapidly. It's not transmissible to humans, but we have like I said earlier, I'm a hunter, so I love to hunt whitetail deer, and we have other hunters that I'm friends with, and they're all like really, really sad. And I'm like, no, this is a good thing, because we have way too many deer in the state, and this will knock that population down. And then if we can keep it in check for a reasonable amount of time, our native plant populations can rise up. On the second part of that is our deer population should get stronger. And if you like to hunt larger bucks, you're going to get larger bucks because you don't have 150 deer per square mile. You're in that 30 to 50 range, which is still too high, but you're in that 30 to 50 range. So your native population or your native plant population start to rebound. But because these deer aren't starving over the winter, they don't have as much stress. They will grow bigger antlers.
And I think that's why we're having disease issue is because of overpopulation. Because instead of 15 per square mile, like it historically should be, we're at 100, 150, 200 deer per square mile. And
not to draw too much or bring up COVID, but to draw a comparison to it, the places where it hit the hardest, fastest were those urban cities where you had people living all together. Well, we have 150 deer per square mile. You have constant interactions with deer. So it just takes one to have this infection. It is spread by an insect called a midge. So you have one that has this infection. Now it's spread from deer to deer. Well, if they're all right next to each other, it's easy for that midge to hit a bunch of them in a day. If they're 10 per square mile, it's going to be hard for that midge that only travels a short distance to hit all 10. So it's an interesting predicament, because like there's the hunters in the state, not that there's many hunters in the state of New Jersey, but they are very upset that this is killing so many deer. But they also want a healthier deer herd. Yeah. As someone with an ecological focus, I'm like, this is only helping. It's not going to kill them all, but if it can knock down our population to a place, it might be a blessing in disguise.
So just to change the subject for a second, go off topic and lighten the subject. Where is Marcus Gray from originally? Is he from Oklahoma?
I think his family's from Missouri.
Okay,
and then
Missouri.
He's from Virginia.
Okay, Missouri. So Marcus Gray from Auto. He's now with Monarch.
So our friend Marcus Gray he now works with Sustainable Monarch, who I think is based out of Nebraska, but he lives in New York. This is a lot of states getting thrown out here. But he was telling us the story that his favorite Christmas tree, or his father's favorite Christmas tree, his father's favorite. Eastern red cedar, because that's what they had growing, and they would go out to the field and cut that. And I don't know if you've ever had one of those in your house or your office, but it is not. Yeah. In fact, when we first started our podcast, one of the things we were doing a lot on video too, and one of our ideas was, we're going to take two plants and put them on either side of us, kind of like that Zach Galifianakis thing where you did between two ferns. And our first one was with Eastern red cedar, and we just put them in this room we're sitting in right now. And oh my God, it was so bad.
We couldn't do the podcast. We had to take them out. We had to let the room
it smelled like a litter box. It was
for quite some time.
Yeah.
And see, we did the same thing as a kid. We would go over in the old cow pasture behind the house. It wasn't ours, but we had permission to go cut an Eastern red cedar down every year for Christmas. And a lot of our Christmas trees, especially when I was really young, were Eastern red cedars. Now, all of those itty bitty needles coming off and dropping into the carpet. And I run barefoot all the time. Forget about wearing socks in the house or shoes in the house. That's not going to happen. I'm going to be barefooted in the house at least. So picking those out of your feet, because yes, they would stick you for months after Christmas. But I haven't done it recently. But
was there an odor? Do you remember there being
don't remember. I was so young at the time, and that was just Christmas. So I don't even know if I would have recognized
A lot
it
of
or paid
candles at
attention to
Christmas
it being
time.
anything different.
A lot of scented candles. It's maybe I don't know, because it's not something we're accustomed to. Maybe if you were accustomed to it, and it's like to some people, maybe that's the smell of Christmas. So
yeah,
I
said, I just didn't know any better. I mean, that's when you're little, when you're 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. I mean, that's just what it is.
You're just excited.
There's presents.
Presents are coming. That is awesome. I think it's just interesting to share these things with someone from another part of the country, because a lot of the times we, not on purpose, but tend to focus on the Northeast and where we're at. Even to break it down even further, the nursery is located in the coastal plain, and most of our plants we grow mainly coastal plain plants, and our plants stay along the East Coast. We may go 5 hours north, 6 hours north, and 6 hours south, but we don't go much further than an hour west. Because we're right on the border of Piedmont and coastal plain, and then you have Appalachia, and it changes your product types and the soil types. So, and it changes so quickly, and you want to do the right thing. So even though we may be growing something that also grows in Piedmont, it's not used to the same hydrology or soil types. And, you have that genetic diversity, but you don't know how well those plants are going to change. One of the plants that we bring up, and Tom will laugh because I did a video on provenance and why, you shouldn't take a red bud from Florida, up into the Northeast, because it hasn't encountered the same type of winters. And one of the plants I brought up was sweet flag acarus, because it's salt tolerant here. It does have a mild salt tolerance here, but it's native all the way to the Mississippi River, and it's not encountered.
I think it was even west of the Mississippi.
West of the Mississippi.
It was native, like even out in Montana.
But stuff. I brought up Nebraska, and then we had a guest inform me that there's salt flats in Nebraska, because I'm like, you don't want to get acarus from Nebraska because it hasn't encountered salt conditions. And they were like, well, technically there's salt flats in Nebraska. So
well, that's even we mentioned, I don't think we referred to it by name, but one of the things we grow a lot of is a plant called Spartina alterniflora. Some people, another thing we get into all the time is how people pronounce stuff, because I think we pronounce a lot of things wrong, and some people call it Spartina. A lot of people call it Spartina, but I'm
sticking to Spartina.
I think it's Spartina, but
actually it's neither, because they've changed the botanical name to Spirala.
but when we looked at we're talking internally in our office about how we're comparing the USDA plants database maps to the BONAP, the Biota of North America project maps. And at first I liked USDA, and then I switched to BONAP because it just gets so much more in depth. But we were comparing a plant like Spartina alterniflora because it's native along the coast, all the way from Maine down to Texas. And then it's an invasive plant in the Northwest California and Oregon, Washington. And you look at the USDA map, it actually shows it, since it's a native plant to the entire country, or to North America, it shows it as native in those areas in the Northwest. Or if you look at BONAP, it shows it's as I forget the term they use, but it's a bad plant there.
Yeah.
But when you actually look at those maps, there's some salt marshes up in Syracuse, New York, which is very inland, and but they actually have salt springs underground groundwater is actually rubbing up against salt deposits in the bedrock, and then coming up to the surface, and it's like as salty as seawater, sometimes even more salty than seawater.
Oh wow.
And you look at that map, and it actually has Spartina alterniflora is native to that county, and that was Syracuse used to be called Salt City because they harvested so much, they made so much salt there years and years ago.
But if the map isn't detailed enough, you could just see Spartina alterniflora is native to New Jersey, which it is, but it's only native to where it's saltwater influence or brackish influence. Not that it can't survive. Freshwater just gets out competed, so you really don't see it.
It lives in the tidal zone from like mean low tide to mean high tide. That's where it thrives. It's one of the only plants that'll grow in those conditions. It takes twice a day flooding, and can take salinity as low as freshwater, but as high as seawater. So 35 parts per thousand. And so its native range is really just a narrow band all through all the coast, literally from Maine and probably even
from Maine,
Canada,
I think, to New Orleans, I think is.
Well, even if you look at like the Texas coast, it's native there. Now it has a little breakup where the mangroves take over in like South Florida. But no, it's really a unique plant. But you look at the map for that plant, and it's interesting to see where it's native to. And I didn't even comprehend. Oh yeah, it's native to like the salt city of Syracuse, New York.
Yeah. So it's a lot to think about. I don't know the answers, but at least we're having the conversations about it. And I think that's the important aspect of it. It's, to me, if we can keep bringing out more questions, and even if you don't know the answers, at least having those discussions in a way that at least people want to hear about it, and I think, podcasts such as yours and what we're doing and so many other podcasts, it's making it more mainstream. It's not just something that someone in the industry would listen to. It's something that I feel like my fiance can listen to and comprehend and get something from. And I think that's the approach that Tom and I tried to take. Was we want anyone to be able to listen to this. We want to make it mainstream so that anyone can get something from it, walk away with something. And then once they do that, there's so many other avenues you can go for more information. But, it's limited to what I know, and I don't know a whole lot.
Exactly. And that's, like you said, I try and make it so my mother, so my friends who are not ecologists, who are not botanists, can understand and, like you said, get something, enjoy it, and get something out of it. If they don't enjoy it, they're not going to keep listening. So they're not going to get anything. Yeah. I don't when I'm in that situation. So why would I expect them to? And that's one of the reasons I reached out to you guys, is because you are so different from where I'm at. And like you said, I tend to stay just because of where I'm at. I have a lot of people from Kentucky, a lot of people from Tennessee that I have on the podcast, these surrounding states. And yet I know I have listeners that live all throughout the Eastern US and even in Western US, a couple in Canada even. But yeah, being able to bring in these different representations and people who know these areas that I don't know, because I had no clue about any of that, or any of the coastal plants. I don't have salt marsh issues in Kentucky here. But yeah, that's really interesting. And it brings up also needing to know, really have an idea of what these different ecotypes are in these different situations, even beyond just saying generalized for the state. And it can get interesting because when you look at those detailed maps, I'm always like, okay, when we're looking at county, is that because it's only naturally grows in that county for some ecological reason, like that's where the salt is? Or is it because nobody checked there in time to find it? So is it a lack of information, or is it detailed information?
And that's, we had that conversation with Sam Droege from the Native Bee Lab, and we're like, it's great that we're figuring out now what we know, but what have we lost that we have no record of? And you can't go back and ever really discover that. And that's what's hard. It's what we've already lost, but it's important that at least we've started this and are working forward. That's why we're so grateful about research that, say, Mount Cuba's doing. Even though it's on cultivar, someone has to do that research. You have to be able to give some scientific explanation of why maybe a straight species would be better than a cultivar, and give me some hard science, because otherwise you're just speculating. Like, you may know that a straight species should be better, but do you really know? Like, until you get the science behind it. We need more of that. And that's what makes it difficult is, for Tom and I, like, one of our biggest states as far as listeners are California. So you have to make a show that in a broad sense can relate to everyone regardless of the situation. And that's where we've tried to keep it at a broader level.
It's an interesting point that Fran brings up, because one of the things that I think about all the time is our podcast is named Native Plants, Healthy Planet, and we really don't talk about plants We do, but not nearly as much as the name would imply. And we spend so much time talking about pollinators and wildlife and like population communities.
Food web. And
even when we have people on to talk about plants, we don't talk about plants. We talk about history and like the history of. We aren't talking so much about the individual plants that make up that community.
Foraging.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Mhm.
So the foraging episode, we're actually talking about individual plants. That's one that we talked about plants a lot more. But when we talked with Dwayne, Dr. Dwayne Estes from Southeastern Grasslands Initiative in Tennessee, yeah, we mentioned some plants, but we didn't go in depth about any plants. It was more about those plant communities, the history of the areas. When we talked to New Jersey Audubon with John Park, who's one of our good friends, we're talking about quail most of the time and what kind of habitat quail like to live in. And then as we got a little bit bigger as far as listeners go, then and saw how diverse the areas these people were listening from, we said, you know what, maybe we should focus on some of these larger organizations like the Xerces Society and like National Wild Turkey Federation and some of these other organizations that are national. Because the original goal of our whole podcast was we wanted to connect the people who liked our social media stuff but were wholesale to the trade only.
Mhm.
So they couldn't buy plants from Pinelands Nursery. But they were interested in it. We wanted to connect them with people who could support their interests. So if you wanted to grow plants for pollinators, well, you're going to want to look at the Pollinator Partnership and Xerces Society and those kind of places. You want to grow native plants for birds, well, now you're looking at New Jersey Audubon and those kind of organizations. If you specifically want to do stuff with monarch butterflies, look at Audubon International's work with golf courses and monarch butterflies, and now Sustainable Monarch. So it was more, we weren't the experts. We were just connecting the people who were interested with experts who were going to find that match their passion.
Yeah. And they all involve plants. Like every conversation involves plants, even though we don't talk about it. But the three main threads always seem to be history, education, and involvement.
Yep.
What historically has happened? What do we need to know? And how can you help? And I think those are the things that were most important. And they all revolve around plants, and I think Tom was the mastermind behind this. And we, you want it to be about plants, like first soil, then plants, because without that, none of this exists.
Mm-hmm.
But, you kind of feel like, all right, we have all these organizations on talking about plants. Are we a hypocrite if we don't discuss what hunters are doing or fishermen are doing, or the other side? What's the other side of that argument? And it really isn't an argument because everyone has the same goal. We're just taking different approaches.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's what broadened or enlightened us as we moved along, just seeing, wow, we're all doing the same thing. We're just doing it differently. Why aren't we working together?
I wouldn't even say they were doing it differently. They were literally doing the exact same things in the exact same places, just for different goals. And it was like New Jersey Audubon was actually really big on this because they brought in a bunch of other partners. But yeah, they have a project that's specifically for quail in the Pine Barrens, but they're bringing Quail Forever, and then they're bringing in all these other organizations like soil conservation districts and other organizations that have their own things, because the plants that are good for quail, a lot of them are really good for preventing erosion. They're good for pollinators. A lot of like the things, so the quail will eat a lot of the seeds from plants, but they'll also eat a lot of the insects that are attracted by those plants. So if you have fields of like lance-leaf tick seed, which is Coreopsis lanceolata, and what's the one I was just thinking of? Oh crap, partridge pea. So those things, they eat seeds from those plants, but they definitely prefer, and for a different part of the season, they prefer the insects that those plants are attracting. So there's grasshoppers and there's different pollinators that come in. Well, the quail are eating those too, but they're not eating all of them. So it's great for pollinators as well. It just kind of, you plant some of these plants and you have, I want to plant something for pollinators, but it's helping so many other things. It's amazing. And that's what we harp on a lot, is they're all doing the same things. Why can't they work together more often?
Yeah,
exactly. And that's why I was like, I don't see it as different sides. It's just like you said, we're all doing the same thing just for different reasons. And I mean, the quail, they need all those different types of habitat and all those different insects and stuff like that. I mean, the pollinators, they need that diverse habitat as well for many of them. So yeah, they all really work together, and it's looking at it more from that ecological standpoint of the overall goals, I think.
Yeah.
But allowing those different individual points of entry. So maybe it's pollinators for one person, maybe it's quail for another. But getting back to what we talked about at the very beginning of this whole long conversation of having that, allowing everybody to be part of the conversation.
Yeah, it's, and the funny thing is it takes some time because what may not be what it seems to be. And I can go into a forest now that I had gone into as a child and see the difference and see that what was a somewhat healthy forest as a child is not a healthy forest today. But my children don't know that. All they know is that this is what a forest looks like. And what do you mean this isn't good? Because this is all I've known. And that's part of the education process and letting your eyes focus to see a little bit bigger picture. You have to zoom out, you have to zoom out, you have to zoom out. And it's hard and it's a lot. And I guess that's the hardest thing. It's a lot. How do you make it palatable without someone being so overwhelmed? They're like, oh, everything's wrong. It's all bad. It's all wrong. And that's one thing that is important, is to focus on the positives and not the negatives. It's really easy to be doom and gloom, and we all do it at some point, especially when it's something that's close to you that you see being impacted. But there is a positive, and nature's resilient, and you should be able to rebound if you do the right things.
And when it comes to getting more people on board, or children are probably the most important facet of it. As long as we can keep the planet alive long enough for them to grow up and take over. But like I brought up the story of my dad and I driving in the car and he's asking me to identify trees. Well, it wasn't limited to just the car. It was every time we were outside, whether we were hunting, fishing, just taking a walk. He was asking me what all these plants were all the time. And even though I wasn't always into it, a lot of it stuck. I didn't know it at the time. And a lot of times I didn't want it to stick, but it stuck. And so some, and even I remember even with other folks, when you go out in the woods and you're going to go set up a tree stand and you're walking through looking for deer sign, and oh, well, this is a spice bush, and like deer like that plant for this reason. Oh, this is they really like white oaks acorns, and they like these plants and that plant, and just kind of go through. And that's something. I just had a son. He's 15 months old now, and that's one of the things I'm like looking forward to and even take it to another level, because I've learned so much more than what some of my hunting mentors had taught me, is going through and actually pointing out all the things. I love walking through the woods, especially this time of year when you're scouting for that deer sign, or even in the spring, you're scouting for turkey sign. But one of my favorite places is this wet meadow. And I spend more time looking at all the plants than I do looking for a sign for where I want to hunt in the fall. It's and I found some really, really cool plants. I was stumped this time last year. I found a plant that looked like Asclepias incarnata. I could tell it was a milkweed, but had leaves more similar to Asclepias syriaca, or so it looked like swamp milkweed. Flower looked just like swamp milkweed, but the leaves looked like common milkweed. And I'm like, what the heck is this plant? And eventually I couldn't find anything online. I sent to one of our state botanists, and he wrote back like within 5 minutes and said, oh yeah, that's. And I was like, oh, I thought I discovered this new kind of milkweed, and you just took but it was Asclepias incarnata subspecies pulchra, which has fuzzy leaves like common milkweed does, and there were much bigger leaves too. And then even you go through that wet meadow a little bit more, you start finding white ones. So it was another variation of forma of that plant, and it was really, really cool. And then you see all the monarchs that are flying around them, and this is just a wet meadow behind our farm. And that I just walk through every once in a while just to check it out. There's so much cool stuff there, and I just find myself looking at all these plants instead of it's a walk through the woods.
And you get to introduce your son to this.
And I can't wait to bring him when I'm just waiting for the day he's old enough that I can bring him out there with me and annoy him with all the little things.
My kids, who are now 21 and 18, have had a lifetime of me drilling them with botanical names. So it's. I think children are when they're the most impressionable is where you make a difference. And I know my generation is just in general much more tolerant than my parents' generation, and my kids are their generation is much more tolerant than my generation. If you can make a difference with them, right before we started this conversation, I saw on social media one of the local nature centers by where I grew up actually host birthday parties, and they were talking about a birthday party for an 8-year-old that it was going to be a night hike and campfire. And just, what an impression that will make, especially for a birthday party, on what they find in that night hike along a lake, and the wildlife they see and the plants that they see, and that connection that creates at that age. Because if you camped as a kid or went canoeing, that sticks, or fished, that sticks with you throughout your life, as opposed to someone that gets introduced to it later in life.
Yeah. And I'll even bring up my wife, because she didn't live in a city or anything, but she lived in a more suburban area with houses right next to each other, way different from where I grew up, even though we only grew up 15 minutes apart. And it just kind of shows how diverse New Jersey is with population. But when we first met, she hated insects. If there was like an ant in the corner of the room, she's up on a chair and screaming at me to get it. But she's grown so much, and she still doesn't necessarily like insects, just because she was always taught, they're creepy crawly things and all that. It's just kind of stuck with her from being a kid. But she's out there killing spotted lanternflies and like pointing stuff out. And she even just told me the other day, she's like, oh yeah, my friend thought I was a maniac because she saw this beautiful insect, and I went and like ran up and smashed it with my shoe because it was a spotted lanternfly, which is a new invasive insect in our area. And but she knew what it was, one, and wasn't afraid to go up and squish it. But and she's taken videos of hummingbird hawk moths and bumblebees and stuff in our garden, because she understands more and I'm not pushing it on her or anything. She's just from being around me, and I'm talking about all this stuff all the time.
Now listen, I grew up in a similar environment to Melissa, and I understand that. And even though I know it's still ingrained in me from what I grew up as, and another great example is my fiance grew up on a farm in Poland. So we were at a party at someone's house, and they were by a lake, and they had chickens outside as well. And I went in to use the bathroom, and there was a huge beetle that kind of like took me back. It was on his back. And then my fiance was going to use the restroom after that. And I was like, be careful, there's a huge beetle. So she ended up coming out with the beetle and feeding it to the chickens. And I just looked at her, and she went food web and went back into the bathroom, and it's a different understanding of that. Instead of not freaking out, not smashing it, she was like, oh, this is food for the chickens.
So I guess the main point I was trying to make like 3 things ago was not so much that it's not even going out and teaching kids about plants and insects and all that stuff. It's just bringing them outside, and you'll be amazed at what they pick up. You don't want to force it on them, but just have a habit of bringing them outside, even if it's just camping. And just when something happens, just explain what it is. That's a great way to get people, and it's a lot of fun for you as well, as long as it's not like a downpour and have all these screaming kids. That wouldn't be fun.
No, but to get deep, like which I almost never do, but I believe it's Carl Jung, the psychologist, that recommended when you have a child to put them outside alone for a portion of the day and let them experience nature on their own, without influence, and so they can start getting their connection with nature at an early age, so that it stays with them, and they learn how to be by themselves. They learn how to interact. And he's like, don't go in the house and just shut the door and not monitor, but monitor from afar and let them interact and gain their own appreciation. There's something to be said. I remember learning that in psychology in high school and thinking, oh man, this is way off. I don't agree with this. And then being where I'm at now and being a parent and seeing that going, man, that was right on.
Yeah. It's one of those things where you look back historically, and I'm big into listening to historical books, if you couldn't tell. But you listen to all this historical stuff and how much more prepared our ancestors were to live outside. They knew what plants to eat. They knew how to hunt. They knew how to gather food and fish and all these things. And if the electricity went out, and there'd be people who had trouble making it through a week or two. And and really, you go out and just go outside. There is so much you can eat just living in your yard. And it's not as hard as people make it out to be. But
No.
Yeah, and
but
even I wish I knew more stuff. I wish I knew I could go outside and knew what plants to eat. I knew a couple mushrooms, I know a couple plants, and I feel so proud when I've made that black cherry cordial, and then we talked about it on our show.
Hooch.
It was basically making prison
hooch.
hooch. You just pick the black cherries, soak them in water for a couple days with some sugar, and then eventually strained out the solids, and it was a mildly alcoholic, bubbly liquid that was really, really delicious.
It was.
And I was so proud of that. And I'm like, this is so like stupidly simple how to make this thing. It was literally, I just went out and picked all these berries and got all the bugs and leaves out. And I felt so proud of it. But if I was 200 years ago, they'd be like, that's every day.
Yeah.
That's what we do to have a party. So yeah, it's just interesting to see how much more we know, but how much more far we are removed from those things.
Yeah. Lives have changed. Our whole lifestyle's changed. I mean, exercise used to be called life. Now we have to go do it.
No, it's true. And it's funny realizing that you have to get back to that. You have to get back to those basics. And, it's just, we've all, some of us are further removed than others, and some, it will takes a little bit of work to get back to that. But it's funny what you see when you realize what's going on. And I'm not an ecologist by trade, but just having some of the best ecologists rub off on me a little bit. I can't imagine what they see that I don't see.
Oh, yes. Well, this has been so much fun, but we've talked for an hour and a half already.
Yeah. I was just looking at it
going. I mean, I've really had a lot of fun with this, but I'm guessing we should probably wrap up at some point. Yeah. So do you guys have anything else that you want to share with us?
Yeah. There's one thing I almost brought it up earlier, but then I didn't, but it's going back to the whole quail thing and also just growing up and being a kid. I remember we had a little patch of woods behind our house that was maybe an acre or two. It wasn't very big. And I remember as a kid just hearing bobwhite quail call in the evenings. And then as I grew up, it was just a novelty when I was a kid. It was something my parents would bring. Oh yeah, those are bobwhite quail. And I remember that experience from when I was probably 5 or 6. And then as time went on, I just kind of forgot about it. I didn't even think about it that listening for those calls. And I was really surprised later. It kind of clicked. I'm like, I haven't heard that. I was late 20s. And I'm like, I haven't heard a quail call in a long, long time. And then when we had John Park on our podcast, and he was like, oh yeah, quail are basically extinct from our state. The only quail left have been introduced through either hunting parks or their program where they were reintroducing quail into the state. But it all started with habitat. And when he told me that and then said, oh yeah, but we're giving out grant money for people who are south of this highway to sign up for and then convert their farms into habitat, and then eventually we're going to bring quail back in from farms in Georgia to reintroduce them to the state. So I signed us up through NRCS, but it kind of goes back. It's in one way I feel like enlightened that I know that we're helping the quail, and I'm going to be so happy when I hear a quail call at our farm here. And I know they're going to live in an awesome place because they have so much already natural habitat. And then we're growing native plants primarily for seed at these farms. So they're going to have so much to feast on at this place. But I feel enlightened in a way because I'm like, it's helping so many other things too. It's helping all of our, so many insects, so many, like all the rabbits are going to be overjoyed at these areas. Deer are really going to love it because there's like a forest thinning aspect to it. Now if we can keep the deer population in check, they'll love it.
But the turkey are going to love it.
The turkeys are going to love it. And then that in turn is the foxes and the coyotes are going to love it because it's just helping the entire food web. Even though we're only doing it and we're only getting money to do it for helping quail, it's helping literally everything. Yes. including me, because I'm getting the reward of hearing a quail call in New Jersey once again.
Yeah, and I can completely relate to what you're saying because growing up behind our house and along one side was an old cow pasture. And the elderly gentleman that owned it ran a few head of cattle, but mostly most of that land was empty. So my brother and I and my family had permission to go over there as long as we weren't messing with anything. And it was a mixture of woods and overgrown fields and all that good stuff. We flushed out so many quail. I mean, I'd be walking through there and all of a sudden covey of quail go up. I jump sky high, but I always turned because I immediately knew what it was. I loved listening to them as a kid. Now, I mean, my mother still lives in the same house, but you don't hear them like that. Occasionally we'll hear one or two, but we don't hear it like that. And a lot of it's habitat change.
Yeah.
It's that property's been bought and they run more cattle on it and things are different now. Yeah. But still, there aren't as many quail there. Where my husband and I live, as a kid, I would have looked at this and said, we should have quail. Mm-hmm. We don't have quail. And it's because of that decreasing numbers. I mean, we're not as bad as you guys are in New Jersey, but yeah, we're losing our quail populations rapidly. And that's something I love to hear.
Yeah. One of the big factors that, agriculture is such an important piece of just the American landscape and food system, even more so. But a lot of it is just agriculture has gotten so clean, where it used to be if you had a field of soybeans, well, there was milkweed growing up there. There's all kinds of things, but through scientific advancements, they've made agriculture so clean so they can get rid of a lot of what they consider weeds. And yeah, it's made it so that you can get more bushels per acre, and it's made our food system a lot cheaper, but it's hindered our environment and our ecology so much because you don't have the milkweed for the monarchs anymore, and you don't have and on top of that, now you have complete farms that are being bought and then converted into housing developments or warehousing and all that. So now it's none of that's there anyway. But and the hedgerow systems, those are some of the best edge habitat for deer, for quail, for foxes, for hawks, for so many things. Mm-hmm. And but because they were able to keep agriculture cleaner, they can farm larger areas and right up to those edges and then clear out those edges so you don't have that habitat there anymore.
And that's why I appreciate as farmland becomes more of a premium and harder to get, especially good farmland. I appreciate organizations like the Nature Conservancy and New Jersey Conservation Foundation and the Natural Land Trust preserving this land and being a steward to the land as well, not just purchasing it and letting it be. You know, I was this past weekend, my fiance and I with her son went tubing down the Brandywine in Pennsylvania. And as we were on the bus going to the launch point, I was telling her a story about how a coworker of mine had lived out near there and had lived at the Holmes Farm where Stargazer's Point, where Mason and Dixon they used that as their guide to draw the Pennsylvania-Maryland border. And as we were driving back there, I'm like, I wonder if that's even still there. Well, the launch point just happened to be right there, and it was preserved by the Natural Land Trust to make sure that this area, the farm, was being sold, and they preserved it. And it was nice to see that not just the natural history, but just some of our American history is being preserved by some of these organizations. And they may have done it for one reason, but it trickles down the same way you're building habitat for quail, but so many other things. And that leads me to thanking you, Shannon, for doing what you're doing, because it may have started as one reason, but all the other reasons and ways that it's helping is invaluable. And I can't thank you enough for having us and for doing what you're doing.
And if you don't mind me tying in one more thing, that Fran hit me off on was he brought up all these organizations that are buying up land, but one of the most important things that we have right now is our NRCS units across the country. Just because they're giving out grant money or cost share agreements to help these farms. They'll give them a little bit of money to keep that land out of production, or to create pollinator habitat, or in our case to create quail habitat. This was a NRCS grant that we got to basically go in with chainsaws and cut some stuff down so we can let some more sunlight in, plant a lot of native plants, a lot of native forbs and grasses. But they're doing so much great work, and it really goes to show that you need to, like, even an everyday citizen, if you really want to make a big impact, it's paying attention to the Farm Bill when it comes out, and looking through that and trying to find out how much is going towards ecological restoration type projects, and even just getting involved with your local politics, because so much of that is happening at a local level or even a county level or state level. And like in New Jersey, we have all these native plant bills that are affiliated to native plants some way or another. There's a Jersey native program coming out. They're saying New Jersey DOT is going to have to use native plants on the side of roads now. This is happening in every state. And then on a municipal level, you've got to look at what some of these building projects are, because that little patch of woods or that meadow, it might be slated to become a housing development if they rezone it the right way. And if you make your voice heard and say, hey, this is huge, this provides so many ecosystem services for our township and if or county or whatever it is, and if we get rid of it, we lose it. It's not coming back. All that water that's falling on that warehouse roof or anything like that is going away. It's going into a storm drain and it's going downstream, and we aren't capturing that water, and it's completely changing the landscape. You need to make your voices heard, even just at the municipal level, to make sure that you're keeping as many of those ecosystem services there. And then on top of it, then you want to try and get the bills so that you can plant more native plants, and you're not getting punished for having a lawn that's too long or having big native plants in the front yard, those kind of things. So it's really important politically to be involved as well, because there's so many things are affected at that level.
See, Shannon, you never know what we're going to talk about.
Oh yeah.
we could do 100 shows and they'd all be different. We could do this over and over.
Oh yeah, I am absolutely sure that would be true. I have no doubt.
But no, thank you. I can't express it enough for doing what you're doing and spreading the message, and just even your approach to it is wonderful, and we can't thank you enough, and we're happy that you made us a part of this, and we wish you nothing but huge success.
I don't think there's enough people. Well, there's definitely not enough people preaching about native plants right now, and I don't see a situation where there could ever be enough. It's we literally need everyone in the country to do something with native plants, or we're in trouble.
But you're doing it from a place of love and kindness.
Exactly.
And that's not always the case. And I can't thank you enough for that.
Yeah. And I thank you guys too, because I mean, you're doing the same thing, just in a slightly different environment with your own little twist, which is awesome, because I know my podcast doesn't attract everybody. Your podcast doesn't attract everybody, but there's a lot of overlap. And maybe just like we were talking about with competitor nurseries, we can share and say, hey, this person can help you better. And that's what I love about this whole field, because so many of us have that mindset and really want to help. And you guys are doing the same thing. I mean, you guys really are reaching out to a lot of people and helping them understand and learn more, and just get excited and see all the fun stuff that we can be doing.
And you have a great point. You just have to attract someone, and our show's not, some people don't care for our show at all. And that's fine. If they find another show that meets their needs, we know we cater to a certain type of audience, and everyone has that. And that's wonderful. And there is overlap. And I'm glad that we could do this jointly and have these conversations, because you just want people to get involved, whether it's us or someone else. And I couldn't have anyone, if they didn't want to listen to us, have them listen to a better podcast than to come see you.
Thanks. Well, maybe they'll start listening to both, because I mean, I listen to your all's podcast and
we listen to yours.
So
exactly. So, I mean, there's room for both. We don't have the same podcast at all.
No, but we don't even know what we're doing from a week to week basis. Before we logged on, we were discussing, what are we doing next week? we don't even have it that far planned out. So
yes, but yeah, like I said, this has been absolutely amazing and so much fun. And I will definitely have links in the show notes to the websites and Facebook pages for Pinelands Nursery, Pinelands Direct, and definitely for the Native Plants Healthy Planet website, so that people can go in and find your guys' pages, follow you all, listen to your podcast as well. And yeah, thanks again for talking.
Come listen to us for all your food reviews and
Fran's childhood stories.
Yeah, just like all about craziness sometimes.
But we will without a doubt promote this and make sure everyone knows about it, so they come take a listen.
Yeah, thank you so much. But yeah, thanks and have a great day. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
I had a lot of fun talking with Tom and Fran. Our conversation ran longer than most of the conversations I have for this podcast, but the time flew by, and I hope you enjoyed the conversation as much as I did. I really do appreciate all that Fran and Tom do to help everyone learn more about native plants, the roles of native plants in the environment, and how we can all become more engaged in local conservation efforts. I believe the Native Plants Healthy Planet podcast fills a valuable niche, and I encourage you to give it a try if you don't already listen to it. Before I wrap this up, I wanted to remind you about my email list. Every week I send a short email with links to the most recent Backyard Ecology blog article and podcast episode, as well as any other news of interest. It's the best way to make sure that you never miss anything in the backyard ecology world. If you haven't signed up, then I encourage you to do so at www.backyardecology.net/subscribe, or go to the show notes and there'll be a link there for you to subscribe. Until next week, I encourage you to take some time to enjoy the nature in your own yard and community.